South Africa is a constitutional democracy. Since the end of apartheid in 1994, it has been regarded globally as a proponent of human rights and a leader on the African continent. But reports of corruption among government officials often emerge. Gender-based violence, rolling blackouts, violence in schools are some of the challenges plaguing the country. Now, let's take a look at some of the work done to advance human rights in the country. This as we commemorate Human Rights Month. We are now joined via Zoom by Dr. Eileen Carter, the South African Human Rights Commission and the Eastern Cape Provincial Manager. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Now, let us start with probably the more positive news. What would you say, in your view, is the greatest human rights achievement, in South Africa that we've done since apartheid?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to your viewers. Well, I think we have come very far as a nation. And I do think in terms of the implementation of the various sets of legislation that we have, which protects not only the equality, but the dignity rights of South Africans, I do think we have come very far looking at the history that we have experienced.
Now, one of your key missions, and I've looked at up on your mission statement, as an independent, national human rights institution, is to support constitutional democracy by promoting, protecting and monitoring the attainment of everyone's human rights in South Africa. And of course, you're supposed to do this without fear, without favor or without prejudice. How do you think you are faring there? Because a lot of the time, South Africans will talk about just some of the basic human rights that are being violated in this country.
Well, I do think as an institution and as any institution, one has to look at lessons it can learn and best practices. But you also have to be cognizant of what the Human Rights Commission's mandate is specifically. So we have illustrated our independence on a variety of occasions as we take on matters without fear and favor against government departments, against political parties, against individuals. So in terms of our trends analysis, it's very clear that equality is still a very, very big issue in South Africa, but not necessarily just that. The socioeconomic rights issue in our country is unfortunately being exacerbated by unemployment as well as the poverty index. And those are things that do make our jobs very difficult, but it also reinforces our passion to make sure that at the end of the day, we do realize the human rights of the most vulnerable in our communities.
And you mentioned one of the biggest one, which speaks to inequality, and we know who suffers, on that ambit, particularly when you look at people who are from disadvantaged communities, as it is deemed. Looking at your province, just some of the issues that have been raised recently. Talk about, people not getting enough nutrition in the province. We still are dealing with issues of pit latrines, and we know the people that are affected. So when you speak about your mandate, what are some of the more pertinent, critical, urgent things that you need to do to correct this?
So we have just come from a strategic planning analysis and an operational planning process where we have identified very pertinent and serious matters. And as you've indicated, as a province, we certainly need to look at the basic nutrition issues of our most vulnerable, including our children. So we have a promotion part in respect of our mandate where we need to pull in our partners at this stage, and largely so our government stakeholders, because you would have noted recently there was also a report about funding that's being returned to Treasury. Now, in terms of the Human Rights Commission, we are not an implementing body, but we need to start holding and continue to hold government departments to account where they don't spend money, which is there to ring fence, to cater to the most basic needs of our vulnerable communities. That includes basic education, it includes roads and infrastructure, it includes health issues. And those are certainly not becoming less. Even if we look at the disaster issues which has taken place in the past recent months, we need to understand that climate change is playing a role in that, but we also need to start promoting a discourse of human rights and preparing for the future, and not only look to being reactive in these issues. We have a very good relationship in terms of the Office of the Premier in this province, but we do need the commitment of the government stakeholders, especially coming this financial year, that we make sure that the resources that are allocated from the public purse to the provinces and to the most vulnerable are in fact spent to address the human rights issues.
You know, in our intro, of course, we talked about, you know, how South Africa has been hailed globally, and has been benchmarked, as a proponent of human rights and a leader on the African continent. But if you look at where we are now and you assess, how we are doing as a nation, I mean, there are critical things that come to mind, load shedding being one of them, and many people saying that it is a violation, in fact, on their basic human rights, especially if you look at the effects of the ongoing power blackouts on people's businesses and their livelihoods, etc. But you also look at, corruption, gender-based violence, and also violence in schools and in universities, as we've recently just heard. How are South Africans even, going to even commemorate this month when you look at the state of affairs?
I think that's a question we have to ask ourselves individually as well. How do we look at what difference we can make individually to this big platter of challenges that we are experiencing, not only locally, but globally? And in that respect, I have to just underscore that the Human Rights Commission has a social harmony national effort that it is rolling out, and it has been rolling out, and we will be continuing this effort, which calls upon the nation to come together in social cohesion to see whether we can address these types of issues you've highlighted. But in doing so and in commemorating the Human Rights Month, we are also calling on to the members of the public to participate in these discussions. For example, one of the topics that we are addressing this month nationally, we are saying consolidating and sustaining human rights culture into the future. Now, in doing that, we will be hosting a lecture at our head office in Constitutional Hill on the 16th of March to do that. But more so, and very pertinently so, feeding into our SHINE project and our social harmony, is we also have a theme of the month to say that we need to address social media and human rights. The theme is a call to action, defending human rights in the age of social media. And what we will be doing there is we will be, one of the main events we will be addressing is the launch of our social media charter. So in doing that is we are calling people to the table. We are calling South Africans and internationally also to the table to speak to us about human rights and human rights that affect us all. Next week, we'll be hosting an event that addresses telecommunications because, as you pointed out, vulnerable communities may not have the resources as urban communities may have, and that as the same is with respect to telecommunications. So do we cater to the needs of everyone equally? And for this month, we are looking at the theme of human rights and technology, and we are looking forward to these events because we need to have conversations about all of it, the nice conversations and the hard conversations. And as South Africans, we have to each put in the effort towards social harmony.
Dr. Carter, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Really do appreciate it. Dr. Eileen Carter, she's the South African Human Rights Commission Eastern Cape Provincial Manager there.